Tax the rich, feed the poor, tell there are no rich no more.
Anyway, I am the broken record. I am the has-been, the one that hasn't changed his underwear in 20 years. I'm 50 years old this year. I pay my taxes. I have 3 kids. I have all the hang-ups of being a middle-aged, middle-class American, but I still know shit from shoe polish. But this debate with my old companion from the foxholes is not really about issues, because Jerry has really declared himself out of being a political activist. His opinions are just that. They are cocktail opinions. But it is a debate that goes on, but we are faced with the problems of the economic squeeze. The 80s are different than the 60s. And how do we grow old? How do we mellow without eating our soul with a shovel, without gobbling up all our political principles? How much money do we need to lead a comfortable life? And how is a comfortable life to be defined? How is our society going to change for more social justice, more peace? And what role is each of us going to play in that kind of a change? Now, this is the debate that goes on within inside of us. I am not Mother Teresa, so when people stop me in the hall and say, "Aren't you selling out? You're getting paid to stand up here in the spotlight and yell and everything. Isn't that some sellout?" I am not Mother Teresa. I don't go around the country calling on people to take vows of poverty. I call on them to make a balance between their individual needs for a comfortable life and the responsibility they have as citizens of a community and partners in a world out there. The most common question I'm asked is, does Jerry Rubin believe everything that you've just heard? He does believe it. He's been born again. He's 110% believer. The problem is the Yuppies are not a real political movement. The Yuppies are a mythology created by the media in order to push overconsumption, to get people to devour more Rolex watches, more Mercedes-Benz, more condominiums than they need to have a comfortable life. So accepting the label by saying that I am a yuppie means that you are saying essentially, I am a greedy, self-centered schmuck. I mean...
You may remember me from the 1960s. I led thousands of young people into the streets, and presidents fighting wars quivered at the sound of my name. The government spent millions of dollars to try to put me and many others in jail for quite a long time. Now, this is a debate between being stuck in the past, and I know how tempting it is to be stuck in the past, because when you're legends like Abbie Hoffman and I were in the 60s, you don't want to give that legend up. It's exciting to be a hero, and it's very difficult to change, and especially difficult because there's a lot of people who are still stuck in the 60s. But anyway, this is a debate, as far as I see it, between the past and adapting to the present and creating the future. If you still think of the old slogan, tune in, turn on, and drop out, then you're going to be on his side. If you believe time is money, then you're going to be more tempted toward my side. Basically, I want to say that I'm very proud of what I participated in the 60s. And nothing that I'm doing today in any sense takes away from that appreciation. And I'm just extremely proud of what we accomplished in the 60s. But I don't want to dwell on that. And I can list those accomplishments from forcing the United States out of Vietnam, toward ending racial segregation, toward the women's movement. But then came the 1970s, and unfortunately, we thought the 60s was going to continue into the 70s, and there was going to be a worldwide revolution, and it didn't take place. And when the 70s happened, a lot of the people that were active in the 60s were forced, first of all, to look at themselves. And we didn't do that in the 60s because it wasn't part of the 60s to be self-reflective. Whenever anything was wrong, you kind of pointed to the government and blamed the government. Everything was always the government's fault. But in the 70s, we found that there were some things wrong with us. First of all, the male chauvinism that was rampant in American society was also true inside the movement, and women rebelled from the political movement in the 1970s. And that's one of the things that ended the activism of the 60s. And women forced men to look at themselves. And one thing about the 60s is we were very macho. We were kind of Rambos of the left. And we had the feeling that the clenched fist was going to transform society. And we were aggressive. And we were not sensitive. And we were not open to self-criticism. And the 70s was a time when men, forced by women, began to look at other parts of their nature. And I think it was a very positive thing. And of course we thought in the 60s that drugs was going to liberate human beings, that if only Richard Nixon would smoke marijuana, if only Richard Nixon would take LSD, he would develop a new consciousness and everything would change. Of course, I think today I believe that drugs are part of the problem, not part of the solution, and that we were wrong about drugs. And although drugs may have played a role in creating a consciousness that were crucial to the 60s, in the 70s and 80s, drugs are a scourge of human beings. And anything that I did to contribute to that, I feel it's one of the things I feel sorry about. But something else happened in the 70s, and that is that we found that our reality was not going to come home, because we saw the world divided into two. All evil emanated from the White House. And around the world were peasant communities that were going to have revolutions and create new societies. And then, of course, Vietnam, the North did take power over the South. Cambodia, tremendous genocide took place. Soviet Union invasion of Afghanistan. Cuba sending troops everywhere. And we began to say, now, what's going on here? Maybe our vision of the world isn't exactly right. And then in 1973, 74, the United States did something that we didn't think was going to happen. The United States got its troops out of Vietnam. And we were shocked about that, because we thought that Vietnam was the essential expression of racist, imperialist American society. And then in 74, of course, came the climax of the 60s, because if we ever thought in the 60s that Richard Nixon was going to be forced out of the White House, we would have said the revolution has happened. But it happened in 74, but it happened because American democracy worked. And then in the mid-70s, that the baby boom generation, 75 million Americans who participated in the 60s and are going through these changes that I described in the 1970s, we can control the future of the United States. We can control the future of the United States because we're the majority. But if they come to us in the 60s and said, okay, you're right, you run the country, we wouldn't have known how to run anything, because we weren't preparing ourselves for that kind of leadership. And so in the 70s, I think millions of individuals made individual decisions to go into the system in one form or another. And the entrepreneurial explosion took place in the middle of the late 70s as the baby boom generation began becoming entrepreneurs, starting their own businesses. 60,000 businesses started in America in the mid-60s. 800,000 businesses started every year today. And the transformation of Western society from an industrial society to an information society, a historical transformation. And that transformation is taking place because of the baby boom generation. So I see the baby boom generation as an innovative, history-making generation that in the 70s created the women's movement and the self-awareness movement and the entrepreneurial explosion, and is about to take political power in the United States. In the last election, neither the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party in any sense appealed to this generation. Ronald Reagan, the Republicans nominated a candidate of the 19th century, Ronald Reagan. And Even though Ronald Reagan says he's for the entrepreneur, none of his policies support entrepreneurship. We're talking now about post-Reagan America, because post-Reagan America will be the baby boom generation America. I predict that in 1988, you will see a baby boom-oriented candidate elected President of the United States. And all the values that we fought for in the 60s, all the things that we talked about and carried picket signs for, we will be implementing with specific programs, implementing with vision, facing the contradictions that we faced in the 70s and in the 1980s and 1990s, turning them into policies that transform the world. Thank you very much.
So in the end, who won the Rubin-Hoffman debate? Although the Vancouver crowd seemed to favor Hoffman, perhaps it's better to ask whose ideas proved right or whose ideas came to fruition. So about 2 years after this debate, unfortunately, Abbie Hoffman killed himself in April of '89, an apparent drug overdose. Many believe he suffered from bipolar disorder and was depressed. His friend and lawyer, William Kunstler, the same lawyer that helped him in the Chicago 7 trial, suggested that Hoffman killed himself due to the disillusionment of the unfulfilled hippie revolution that Hoffman envisioned. Kunstler said in an article in LA Times in April of '89 that if Abbie did take his own life, I'm sure that he did so in order to leave a powerful message to the young people of America whom he loves so much. He sacrificed himself to dramatize the need for them to participate as their 60s counterparts did in opposing repression, injustice, racism, sexism, ecological destruction, and other pernicious manifestations of a system that places profits before people. Rubin's prediction of a baby boomer president didn't happen in '88, but it did happen in 1992 with the election of Bill Clinton. The Clinton legacy is that of yuppie hippie power politics and monetary success. This is very akin to Rubin's ideas and less than those of Hoffman's ideas. Unfortunately for Rubin, he was killed in a car accident in November of '94, just 5 years after Hoffman's death and 2 years after Clinton was elected. In regards to Clintons, to this day, the Clintons' legacy is often tainted with corruption. The latest being the 2016 election, with accusations that it was tilted in Hillary Clinton's favor against Bernie Sanders, who was an associate of Abbie Hoffman at one time, as pictured in the Vanguard debate and lecture, as shown in this picture below. Thus, in conclusion, the debate within the hippie left still continues to this day. 50 years after the Chicago DNC Riot of '68, the grandchildren of the hippies are becoming the new left. Whose version will win out with this new left? Will it be the Yuppie Rubin hippie or the revolutionary Hoffman hippie? Furthermore, how will the left and the right react to all this, especially in the wake of the Trump era? Only time will tell. For the History Rock and Roll, I'm G. Have a good day.